Nobody warns you that stepping into the life you were meant to live feels almost nothing like arriving. It doesn't feel like victory. It doesn't feel like the motivational posters promised. Most people who are right on the edge of becoming who they actually are don't feel excitement or clarity. They feel disoriented, unsettled, like the ground beneath them is shifting and nothing they used to rely on makes sense anymore. I have spent a lifetime watching people at exactly this threshold, and what I have found is that the transition into an authentic life mimics collapse so convincingly that most people panic, turn around, and rebuild the prison they just escaped from, because at least the prison felt familiar. I have spent decades working with people who were on the verge of becoming finally themselves. The process of becoming whole, shedding the false self, and stepping into alignment with who they actually were beneath all the conditioning, the performance, the roles they had inherited. And I noticed something that disturbed me. The people closest to their breakthrough were almost always the ones most convinced they were falling apart. They'd come to me in crisis, believing something was deeply wrong, but I recognized the pattern. Nothing was going wrong. Everything was finally going right. They just didn't have a framework for recognizing transformation, because transformation doesn't announce itself the way people expect it to. Today, I want to walk you through the 5 specific signs that tell you you're not breaking down, you're breaking through into the life that was always meant for you. These aren't vague spiritual platitudes. They're psychological shifts I have watched again and again in people undergoing genuine change. And if you're experiencing even 2 or 3 of them right now, what you're going through isn't a crisis. It's a threshold. The first sign is that your old life starts falling apart without you deliberately destroying it. Relationships that lasted years suddenly become unbearable. A career that felt stable and reasonable now suffocates you every morning. Friendships that were comfortable start feeling hollow, like you're performing connection rather than experiencing it. And the strangest part is, you didn't choose for any of this to happen. You didn't wake up one day and decide to dismantle everything. The structures just started crumbling on their own. I call this the self outgrowing its container. When you begin becoming who you truly are, your inner reality shifts before your outer reality catches up. The person who built your current life, who chose that relationship, that career, that social circle, was operating from a version of yourself that no longer exists. They chose from conditioning, from fear, from the need to belong, from whatever survival strategy got them through childhood. And now that the deeper self is emerging, everything built by the false self starts losing its structural integrity. This is why it feels like things are falling apart rather than coming together, because from the outside they are falling apart. You're losing things. Connections are fraying. Stability is dissolving. But I recognize this dissolution as a necessary precondition. You cannot build an authentic life on top of a foundation laid by the mask you wore. The old structures have to come down first. Not because they were bad, but because they were built for someone you no longer are. What makes this so disorienting is that you can't explain it to anyone. People around you see the dissolution and assume something's wrong with you. Are you depressed? Are you having a midlife crisis? Are you being ungrateful for what you have? And you can't articulate what's actually happening because you don't fully understand it yourself. You just know that staying feels like suffocating. And everything you used to tolerate now registers as intolerable. That's not dysfunction. That's you refusing to keep living a life that belongs to someone you've outgrown. I have watched people try to resist this dissolution, force themselves to stay inside structures that were crumbling, and develop physical symptoms, depression, and anxiety that worsened the harder they clung. There is no negotiating once you're ready to change. It dismantles, and your only real choice is whether you cooperate with that process or exhaust yourself fighting it. The second sign is that you stop needing people to understand you. This one sneaks up quietly for years, maybe decades. You've been explaining yourself, defending your choices, translating your inner experience into language that others might accept. Every decision required justification. Every boundary required a 3-paragraph explanation. Every authentic impulse had to be packaged in a way that didn't make anyone uncomfortable. And you did this so automatically that you didn't even notice how much energy it consumed. Until the day you just stopped. Not with anger, not with resentment. You just ran out of the particular fuel that powers the need to be understood. Someone questions your decision, and instead of launching into explanation, you feel a quiet nothing, not apathy, something more like sovereignty, the recognition that your life doesn't require anyone else's approval to be valid. I call this withdrawing the authority you handed away. For most of your life, you've been projecting your sense of authority outward, onto parents, partners, friends, society. You unconsciously gave them the power to validate or invalidate your existence. Their understanding meant you were real. Their approval meant you were acceptable. Their agreement meant you were sane. And this arrangement felt normal because it started so early you never knew any different. But becoming who you are reclaims that authority. The center of validation moves from external to internal, and when it does, the desperate need for others to understand you dissolves. Not because you don't value connection, but because your sense of self is no longer dependent on it. You can be deeply misunderstood and still feel solid in who you are. That's a seismic shift. And it terrifies the people who were used to you needing their approval. I've seen this withdrawal trigger crisis in existing relationships. People who are used to you explaining and justifying yourself interpret your quiet certainty as coldness or arrogance. They feel shut out. They accuse you of changing, of thinking you're better than them, of not caring anymore. And in a way, they're right. You have changed. But what they're calling loss of caring is actually the arrival of self-possession. You haven't stopped caring about people. You've stopped outsourcing your identity to them. This sign is easy to confuse with emotional shutdown, and it's important to know the difference. Emotional shutdown feels numb, protective, walled off. It comes from being hurt too many times. But what I'm describing feels open and grounded. You're not hiding from connection. You're just no longer willing to abandon yourself to maintain it. That distinction matters because one is a wound response and the other is genuine maturity. If you can sit peacefully with being misunderstood without feeling the need to correct anyone's perception of you, something fundamental has shifted in you. The third sign is that guilt becomes your most frequent uninvited emotion. You make a decision that feels right, deeply, unmistakably right, and immediately guilt floods in. You say no to something you would have said yes to for years. And instead of relief, you feel like you've committed a crime. You choose yourself for the first time in a situation where you'd always chosen everyone else. And the guilt is so heavy it almost convinces you to reverse the decision. I understand this guilt not as evidence of wrongdoing, but as the emotional signature of breaking a conditioning. Every family, every culture, every social structure installs rules about who you're supposed to be. These rules get embedded so deeply that violating them feels morally wrong, even when the rules themselves were destructive. The child who was taught their worth came from self-sacrifice will feel guilty every time they prioritize themselves. Not because self-prioritization is wrong, but because it violates a program installed before they were old enough to question it. This is what makes the guilt so convincing. It doesn't feel like a program. It feels like conscience. It feels like your deepest moral compass, telling you that you've done something terrible. And so most people obey it. They feel the guilt and retreat. They reverse the authentic decision. They go back to the pattern that feels wrong but doesn't trigger the alarm, and they stay trapped, not by external circumstances, by an internal enforcement mechanism they mistake for their own values. On this point, I have always been relentless. I have told the people I work with that the guilt they feel when they start becoming themselves is not their guilt. It is the system's guilt, the family's guilt, the culture's guilt. It is the emotional punishment installed to keep them compliant. And the only way through it is to feel the guilt fully, recognize it as conditioning rather than conscience, and make the authentic choice anyway. Not because the guilt disappears. It doesn't, at least not immediately, but because each time you act from authenticity, despite the guilt, you weaken its hold on you. I have seen that the people who can tolerate this guilt, who can sit with the terrible feeling of violating their conditioning without retreating, are the ones who eventually break through. The ones who can't tolerate it remain trapped in lives built by other people's expectations, wondering why they feel so hollow despite doing everything right. The guilt is a guardian at the gate. It's designed to turn you back. And walking through it while it screams at you that you're a terrible person is one of the most difficult things a human being can do. If you're making choices that feel authentically yours and being immediately punished by guilt that seems to come from nowhere, that's not a sign you're becoming selfish. That's a sign you're dismantling a control system that's been running your life without your consent. The guilt is loudest right before it loses its power. And the life you were meant to live is on the other side of your willingness to keep walking while it rages. The fourth sign might be the most quietly liberating of all. You develop a genuine tolerance for being misunderstood, and not just by strangers or acquaintances, but by the people closest to you, the people whose understanding used to feel like oxygen. Your parents, your oldest friends, your partner, the people whose perception of you felt like it defined you. And something shifts where their misunderstanding of who you are and what you're doing no longer creates the emergency it used to. This is different from the second sign, stopping the need for approval. That's about no longer seeking external validation. This fourth sign goes deeper. This is about being actively, visibly misread by people you love and not crumbling under the weight of it. They tell you you've changed, and instead of scrambling to prove you're still the person they knew, you quietly acknowledge that they're right. You have changed, and you're not going to undo that change to make them comfortable. I have found that this tolerance only emerges after real confrontation with the parts of yourself you rejected. The selfishness, the anger, the darkness you were taught to deny. Once you face those parts, other people's projections lose their sting. Someone calls you selfish, and instead of the old panic, you think, yes, I have a selfish part. I've met it. I've made peace with it. Their accusation isn't a revelation anymore. Before, being called selfish would have devastated you because you were terrified it might be true. After, it's just a description of one facet of a complex human being. It can't destroy you because you've already claimed it yourself. This is why I have always insisted that confronting your own darkness is the foundation of becoming yourself. Not because it makes you perfect, because it makes you unshakable. When you've voluntarily faced everything about yourself that others might use against you, no one holds leverage over your identity anymore. Their misunderstanding of you doesn't create an existential crisis because your understanding of yourself is no longer fragile. It's been tested in the fire of honest self-confrontation. No one's opinion of you can compete with that. I have watched people who reach this point live out a paradox. The less they need to be understood, the more deeply they connect with the people who actually can understand them. By releasing the desperate grip on universal approval, they create space for something rare, specific, profound, real connection with people who see them clearly. Not because they performed clarity, because they stopped performing altogether. And the people capable of recognizing authenticity find them not through effort, through the pull of someone who has stopped pretending. The fifth sign is perhaps the most confusing, and it's the one that sends the most people running back to their old lives. You feel grief for no apparent reason. Deep, quiet, persistent sadness that moves through you like weather. Nothing bad is happening. In fact, by external measures, things might be better than they've been in years. But you're carrying a heaviness that doesn't correspond to any loss you can name. You're mourning something, but you can't identify what died. I have seen this immediately in people who were truly transforming, and I consider it one of the most important signs of genuine change. I call it mourning the unlived life. When you step into who you actually are, you simultaneously release every version of yourself that you could have been, but never will be. The person your parents wanted you to become, the version of you that stayed in that relationship, the self that followed this safe path, the identity that kept everyone comfortable. These versions of you were never real, but they were possible. And as you commit to your authentic path, those possibilities die permanently. That's what you're grieving. Not a person, not a relationship, not a specific loss. You're grieving potential. You're mourning the roads you'll never walk, the lives you'll never live, the selves you'll never become. And this grief is disorienting, because nothing in our culture teaches us to mourn possibilities. We grieve deaths, breakups, failures. We don't have language for grieving the versions of ourselves that had to die so the real one could emerge. I have seen that people who resist this grief, who try to push past it or rationalize it away, stall. The grief isn't an obstacle to transformation. It's part of the transformation itself. It's the way of honoring everything that's being released, of acknowledging the weight of choosing one life over all the other lives you could have lived. Refusing to grieve is refusing to let go. And refusing to let go means you can't fully step into what's waiting for you. This grief also contains something most people don't expect: mourning for the years already spent living the wrong life. When you finally feel what it's like to be authentic, you simultaneously recognize how long you went without it. 20 years, 30 years, maybe longer. All that time living according to someone else's blueprint. All those years of performing instead of being. The grief isn't only forward-looking, it's backward-looking too. You're mourning the time you can't recover, and that mourning is one of the heaviest things a human being can carry. But I have also seen something remarkable in people who let this grief move through them completely. On the other side of it was a lightness they had never experienced. Not happiness exactly, something quieter and more substantial. A settledness, the feeling of finally occupying your own life instead of visiting someone else's, as if you'd been wearing clothing that was slightly too tight for decades and finally took it off. And for the first time you can breathe fully, realizing you'd never been breathing fully before. I describe this as your true self, replacing the ego as the center of the personality, not destroying the ego. The ego is still there, still functional, still necessary, but it's no longer driving. Something deeper, something more aligned with who you actually are, has taken the wheel. And the life that unfolds from that center feels different from anything you've experienced. Not because external circumstances changed dramatically, because you are finally the one living your life instead of a constructed identity living it for you. What makes all 5 of these signs so difficult to recognize is that they look like problems from the outside. Dissolution looks like failure. Withdrawal from approval seeking looks like coldness. Guilt looks like evidence of wrongdoing. Tolerance for misunderstanding looks like disconnection. Grief looks like depression. Every single sign of genuine change mimics something our culture pathologizes. And so people in the middle of the most important transformation of their lives get told they need medication, therapy focused on returning to baseline, or simply to snap out of it and get back to normal. But I tell you, there is no going back to normal. Normal was the problem. Normal was the false life built by conditioning, fear, and the desperate need to belong. Normal was the cage you decorated so well you forgot it was a cage. And now that you've outgrown it, now that the process has begun and it's irreversible, normal isn't available to you anymore. Not because you're broken, but because you've finally started to heal. The disorientation you feel isn't confusion. It's the space between who you were and who you're becoming. The emptiness isn't depression. It's the clearing where something authentic can finally be built. The grief isn't pathology. It's the emotional cost of finally choosing truth over comfort. And the guilt, the relentless guilt that punishes you for every genuine choice, is the sound of a control system losing its grip on you. I have spent my career watching people stand at exactly this threshold. Most of them turn back. The dissolution was too frightening. The guilt was too heavy. The grief was too deep. The misunderstanding from loved ones was too painful. They retreated into the familiar structures and spent the rest of their lives with a quiet ache they could never quite explain. The ache of knowing they almost became who they were meant to be, couldn't tolerate the cost. But some didn't turn back. Some stood in the dissolution and let the old structures fall, felt the guilt and walked forward anyway. Sat with the grief until it moved through them. Let themselves be misunderstood without reaching for explanations. Took back the authority they had handed away and found their own center. I have watched these people transform, not into something supernatural or spiritually elevated, but into themselves, fully, unapologetically, without performance, into human beings finally living lives that belong to them. And I have noticed that these people share something in common afterward. Groundedness that can't be shaken by outside opinion. A clarity about what matters and what doesn't that seems to arrive without effort. Capacity for genuine connection that exceeds anything they experienced when they were performing connection for approval. And a quiet, unmistakable aliveness. Not excitement, not euphoria, but the simple, profound experience of being present in a life that actually fits. That's what's on the other side of these 5 signs. Not a perfect life, not the absence of struggle, but the presence of yourself in your own existence. The end of the exhausting performance of being someone you're not. The beginning of discovering who you are when you're no longer who everyone else needed you to be. If you're in the middle of this right now, if your old life is dissolving, if the guilt is relentless, if the grief has no name, if the people you love don't recognize you anymore, I tell you, you're not falling apart. You're falling into place. And the only thing required of you is the willingness to keep going. When every conditioned instinct tells you to turn back, you won't turn back. Something in you already knows that. The same something that started this process without your permission. The same part of you that outgrew the container before you were ready. That part knows where you're going, even when the rest of you is terrified. Trust it. It's been waiting your entire life for you to stop performing and start arriving. That's what becoming yourself is. Not becoming someone new, becoming who you were before the world told you to be someone else. And the 5 signs that look like destruction are actually the architecture of that becoming. Every dissolved structure, every withdrawn illusion of needing others' approval, every tolerated misunderstanding, every wave of guilt and grief, they're not taking something from you. They're returning you to yourself.